Welcome to the Media Navigators, brought to you by the World Media Group. My name is Belinda Barker and I'm the Chief Executive. Today we're going to be talking about digital transformation and in particular the impact of blockchain on our sector. Digital has changed everything for anyone working in the marketing industry. Every year it seems to evolve faster and faster. About 3 years ago, I met Amir Malik, who we're going to be talking to this morning. Amir was at the time in a new role at Accenture, and he attended or was speaking at an event the World Media Group was hosting in Paris. One of the things that really struck me was Amir's enthusiasm and his ability to articulate really difficult concepts in very simple ways that even an idiot such as myself could understand, and particularly kind of the ramifications of what blockchain could do for the whole world around us. Now, this was all kind of 3 or 4 years ago, and a lot of it was still very conceptual at that point in time. But since then, we have moved on significantly, and I really wanted to pick up that conversation with Amir today to see where we were going, and particularly what the direct implications were for our industry over the next couple of years. I'm joined also today by Danny Aldred from the Financial Times, who, like me, is not a blockchain expert. And we're going to be talking together with Amir, hopefully asking the questions that you would be asking yourself if you were here. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Danny Aldred, who's the Global Advertising Director for the Financial Times. Welcome, Danny.
Thank you, Belinda. Nice to have me. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. And welcome to Amir Malik, who is the digital marketing expert at Accenture Interactive. Welcome, Amir.
Thank you, Belinda. Real pleasure to be here, and I'm grateful for having me on.
Brilliant. And are you well? Have you been, have you been coping through COVID?
I am well. I am happy to say that. I think I actually have had COVID, although I haven't had an antibody test. We all have in my house, but equally, I guess for me, writing off 2020 and seeing how it all unfolds as we enter 2021, basically.
Yeah, I can only echo that, Amir. I think 2020 for all of us is non-existent, and we're hoping to bounce from 2019 to 21. Thankfully, all are well in my household, although I am getting slightly tired of working from home and miss mixing with colleagues, particularly from a social point of view. But all well, thank you, Belinda. Amir, it's very clear that you are the thought leader in the blockchain from an advertising point of view. And I know that you live and breathe the world of blockchain, how that feeds into the advertising ecosystem. But for a lot of our listeners, I think the understanding of how blockchain works and what it really does is not as clear as it may be. And I wondered if we could just start with you giving us a very simplistic view of how blockchain works.
Well, firstly, thank you for those accolades. I think there are many sort of blockchain leaders out there. I think what I've done is try to focus on its development within the advertising context. And I really am trying to be at the forefront there where possible. I do think the advertising industry is moving slowly, but it is picking up at the same time. in terms of explaining blockchain, it's a good question. I will avoid going into centralized, decentralized, public, private ledgers and try to give a simplistic explanation, which is the way to think about blockchain is, first of all, to conceptually think about how we record events, how we record information, and that a blockchain event or record is an immutable record. It is a way of either concealing, containing, or creating information that can't be altered or changed, and is heavily encrypted and hard to deconstruct or to hack effectively. And even with the onset of quantum computing, it should keep records of information that exists as sort of digital data assets intact and impenetrable to any nefarious or ill-intentioned means. And there's various different blockchain entities which are built with this conceptual framework in mind, and it's basically bringing heavily encrypted assets of information into a space that can be centralized or decentralized, but ultimately cannot be changed. And that's why it's got very good use cases when it comes to financial services, money, health records, provenance. So, keeping the security and the history around, antiques, high-value products, as well as tracking the movement of money. And I think that's where advertising gets really interesting.
So it's really interesting, the different types of industries that you talk about there, because I don't think it's unfair to say that blockchain originally was synonymous with cryptocurrencies, or Bitcoin in particular. Yeah. It's for me, it's really interesting to understand how you see blockchain technology working in that media world. What is it that you think it will do that we currently don't have?
It's a great question. I think I'd like to start out by just making a comment on cryptocurrency, right? So nobody can really can have a scaled interest in Bitcoin specifically, but I will declare myself as a believer in Bitcoin. And for that, I'd say that if you look at Bitcoin, what it's done is it's really shown the power of digital. And how disruptive digital will be to, our entire human existence, right? And the way that we've built our trade industry, our principles of trade, our principles of currency. And COVID is going to accelerate that, because people will become less and less comfortable with cash, which became a promissory for gold. And there's just essentially paper and coins. And I think if you look at Bitcoin specifically, just all the variables of Bitcoin, if we talk about the whole cryptocurrency, the Ponzi scheme aspect of spinning up a crypto, selling it for 0.0001 cents, and then it being valued at 5 cents, but it's just made somebody $100 million. Literally, that is what's happening as we speak. Bitcoin specifically is a finite volume. You're basically investing in a digital currency or asset, which is more akin to a precious gem. So if you look, when typically there's wars or revolutions, gold rises, precious metals rise in their value because currency could change. What we're seeing is that Bitcoin is also rising, and finite volume. It can be invested in a fragmented way. So you can own a Satoshi, which is 0.0001 Bitcoin. It's got 3 trajectories, right? Possible outcomes. It either declines to nothing, it stays the same value that it is forever, which is unlikely because it's fluctuating, or it rises. And because there's only now 16 million left, and you've got the likes of the Rothschilds, Goldman Sachs, invested in Bitcoin and trying to hold Bitcoin, my theory is that it's going to continue to rise over a spectrum of peaks and troughs, but naturally going up. So if you've got if a Bitcoin's about £8,000, and that's great, equal to or less than 3% of your total net worth, I would recommend you own a Bitcoin. And it's great because if you can't own a whole one, a bit of one through Coinbase, because it will introduce you to the blockchain industry. You'll understand what's going on. You'll take an interest in that and you'll upskill yourself. Equally, if it rises, and if you listen to some of the figures, to over 100 grand per Bitcoin, which is not inconceivable. I'm telling you, if anyone values my opinion, it's not inconceivable that 5 to 10 years from now, a Bitcoin could be equal in value to 100 grand or to $1 million.
Can I jump in a sec? Because I work for the FT and I think we now need disclaimers on investments can go up and down.
This is also an Amir Malik opinion, which I do share widely, but it's not reflective of any company. But I would say that, look, the thing about Bitcoin now, making it more relevant, is if we take out a contract together and we invest and we write that to a ledger, a blockchain ledger, or we record that within a blockchain, nobody can change that record. It is there permanently and it's immutable, meaning that if you then track multiple events and multiple transactions, you can see the history of a single Bitcoin fragment, right? Whether it be in terms of the actual value of it, or whose hands is it exchanged, which wallets does it pass through. And when you think about that and you say, oh, hold on a second, well, the real difficulty with money is it goes into this grey area and it becomes grey money. Even in the advertising industry, you know, grey money is when clients give money to media agencies, they pay it into a repository or a bank account that could be in Switzerland, it could be in the Netherlands, it could be in Ireland. That money that goes into that bank account isn't the same actual cash that's been spent on media by the media agencies, because the publishers invoice the media agencies for the expenditure of those advertising dollars, but that comes from a different bank account to where the advertiser deposited their money to the media agency. So this leads to some interesting dynamics around the flow of cash in the advertising value chain. Some of it is, I guess, is you know what? It's not illegal. It's not actually a bad thing. It's about being opportunistic and about maximizing returns as a part of the advertising value chain. But where it gets problematic is when you can't answer for it and you can't explain where the ad dollars go. And this is where blockchain plays a role. So if we were to take one of the main blockchain entities and say, well, you're going to help us in the advertising industry track programmatic spend, just programmatic, working through the SSPs, the DSPs, the advertiser, the agencies, to see what actually happens to that dollar. What is the breakdown of that dollar, right? Well, you don't need to commission a very expensive audit. You don't need to commission, whoever to come in and check that, right? And I don't really want to make a career personally out of auditing that dollar, blah, blah, blah. You just want to have an efficient process that reveals it. Blockchain gives us that opportunity. And it's go on.
Just for the listeners, could you just explain exactly how that works?
Right. So if you think for a second, right, and if we're talking to an industry-specific audience who understands digital marketing, an advertiser, let's take it from the beginning. Big company X has $100 million to spend in advertising. They spend $50 million in digital. $50 million is then spent through all these digital platforms and ad tech vendors. And that 50 million is reaching publishers who are selling ad space and opportunities to show that brand to audiences. But in reality, what happens is a large chunk of that 50 million is going into tech fees, people fees, agency fees, plugins and third-party data fees. And you can't really understand how the publishers are being paid for that opportunity. You can't really determine what is the split of that 50 million across these different entities. PwC's recent report highlights that 15% of it is unaccounted for, and that actually all the fees are varied. So how do you drive more automation and more consistency? Is by actually being able to track as the money leaves entity A, which is the advertiser, and ends up in entity D, which is the publisher, what's happening at the B junction and the C junction? What's happening in terms of that money going out? And we will never really be able to understand that without people opening up their books, which is very difficult to demand, or a technology solution, which is blockchain, that just is accessible and immutable and records every transaction event along that daisy chain of advertising. And
how far are we off being able to do that?
So there are a few complexities. You have I'd say there's three. I'd start with the technology one, which is the volume of exchange requests across multiple publishers, multiple platforms, multiple advertising instances. If we're all looking at our phone on average 120 times a day, right, literally lifting up our phone, that's leading to RSI in our hands, we are generating opportunities for advertising constantly. And once you've got 1 billion people in Africa on their phone in any given hour, another billion in India, another billion in whatever, Europe, all live at the same time on their phone, you've got 3 billion ad opportunities. Once they move through pages, that becomes 9 billion on free page views. Multiple ads, it all starts to add up. You've got a high volume of requests that will be made against any blockchain. Blockchain needs to evolve to be able to deal with those volume of requests. That's the technology challenge that we need to overcome. And if you speak to different blockchain entities, from Ether to Stellar, they will promise you that they can cope with that. But I think the jury's still out on it. And I say that in a reserved way because I know some of my friends that work in blockchain think that they're nailing it, and I want them to be successful. But we still need to get a clear conclusion that that's possible technologically. Then you've got the legal framework, right? So as we move different markets, different geographies, advertising spend is going through different geos, different platforms. Some of those have very strong protective legal principles that stop the disclosure of ad spend. And some don't, right? So there's inconsistency in our industry. But what you can't argue against is that the advertiser who owns that money that's being used to fund our industry, they have the right to know. They at least have the right to know, right? So it doesn't need to be for public consumption, but the advertiser themselves has the right to know, and legally they need to achieve that. And that leads me to the third area, which is philosophically, I think the mentality of ad tech owners, ad tech vendors, many of our advertising industry leaders, it's not that they're against blockchain. I just don't think they're exposed enough to accept this yet. And therefore, that will lead to some delays. The risk is, a hyper-successful platform, a TikTok or somebody like that, just introduces it and says, as part of our service, you see exactly the flow of the ad dollar as an advertiser, you see the fee, and here you go. It's all on a plate. And at that point, I think if you're a rational CMO who knows you can reach the right audience and can have transparency over your ad spend, if you don't think that as a CMO, your CFO is going to think that, your CEO is going to think that, and they're going to say, spend more with them. And that's where I think we're heading as people move into digital platforms.
If I understand you correctly, Amir, is that reliant on the main players in that ecosystem all embracing the technology?
100%. 100%. It's funny because you see these articles about big platforms disclosing their fee on average, etc. If you accelerate the rate of human intelligence evolving, you just know that we're going to be living in more of a transparent world, right? So we're just either just trying to delay, right, the inevitable, but you can't stop the waves in the ocean. So I think absolutely it needs to be embraced by the platforms. But, people are too stuck in the day-to-day to realize that. I mean, that's why blockchain enthusiasts are seen as these weird and wacky people by many industries. But ultimately, it will disrupt every industry, right, including advertising. That is an inevitability.
So I think for most, it's probably clear how that would work in the programmatic environment. Yes. So which would mean that the bigger DSPs and SSPs and the bigger exchanges all needing to employ this technology, as well as advertiser and media owner at both ends. But how else do you see it playing out across non-programmatic channels? Can it work in those environments?
Yeah. Because if you look, right, if you're a typical publisher, you probably spend a lot of money, a lot of effort and people hours on trying to stand up an order management system, and you probably still haven't got it correct anyway, right? So Operative or anything Salesforce.
You've had several in the last 10 years.
I'm not surprised. Well, I remember, some of my old colleagues trying to install that at globally recognized publishers and platforms, and still trying to fix it today. But the idea is that in a non-programmatic environment, those order management systems can write down or can record all the input and entries to a blockchain. So you can keep a queryable database of those orders in the blockchain. So let's say, for example, you've got a contract with a rebate attached with an agency that's been executed directly on behalf of an advertiser. All those components, including the rebate, can be written into the blockchain.
Wow.
And does that mean that we stop rebates? No, I don't think that needs to be the outcome, right? There are negotiation features that make trading fun, right? An industry that people want to work in. But blockchain doesn't need to prevent us from doing that, right? E.g., how can I create incentives for you to spend more, right? How can I get that competitive advantage? What we need to avoid is people taking money unknowingly, right? Or in the ignorance of the entities involved, right? We need to be more inclusive in that discussion, but it doesn't mean we can't do clever things, and it doesn't mean it can't be written to blockchain.
So when some big things need to shift, but it's sounding to me like this is 5 years out, 10 years out.
Yeah.
Is that?
I mean, somebody asked me 2 years ago, would blockchain be live in advertising? And I think I went, I really believe so. And obviously I was wrong. And it's just one of those things that you keep saying, those questions about, is it 3 years away, is it 5 years away? You keep going, yeah. But then 3 years from now, you're sort of having the same conversation until enough people believe in it. So I think the reality is that elements of the blockchain can help the advertising industry today. The question around whether that's going to happen isn't a technology question, it's a human question. And whether people decide to do it or to take it on board? And I can't answer that question. I don't know. I think COVID actually is going to rapidly accelerate the digitization of all industries. Whereas before, a third of your revenue, if you're a retailer, was coming from an online channel. By 2022, 2/3 of it will be, right, or even 4/5 of it will be online. And that's just a fact, because the commercial real estate industry is going to be severely impacted by COVID. So does that mean then, as it gets more digital, tracking becomes more important? We can't have this murky digital environment which we've had for so long. We need to have much more certainty around how we record events and record information, and that's where blockchain will play that role.
I'm very conscious of time, Amir, but I've got one question, and it's not a quick one to answer.
Go on.
From what you're explaining, I've learned a huge amount. I've certainly learned a huge amount around how blockchain works. I've certainly got the feeling how it would be employed across the ad industry. I've also learned that you're a heavy investor in Bitcoin. But to me, when I play this whole ecosystem through, there are implications, right, to the agencies, to the tech vendors, and very probably to the auditing companies, one of which you obviously work for. What do you see those implications being?
Well, the first thing I clarify, and it's amazing, like Danny says, everybody thinks that Accenture is, not everyone, and most people actually, I guess by a repercussion of PR, believe that Accenture is an auditing business. We're not an auditing business. We don't, so if you look at the big four, you look at PwC, EY, KPMG, they audit right from your taxes, your finances, etc. Accenture actually don't do that. Accenture very early on pivoted to sort of being a technology-focused professional services company. And so that's the clarity I'd get. We get typecasted with that audit badge. So you've given me an opportunity just to offer that clarity, which I'm grateful for. Thank you. But you're right in a sense that, and just remind me, what role do companies play, saying in terms of?
Well, yeah. So from what you're saying, and the chain of events, and the way in which you'll capture information, and the movement of money, as you will, there's likely to be implication to auditing businesses, of which Accenture isn't one. There's likely to be implications to ad agencies. There's likely to be implications to tech vendors. They're the ones that are obvious just through our conversation. Yeah. Those implications are likely to be.
Well, massive, right? And to distill that, if you look at what's happening in the audit industry, they're all getting into blockchain. Right, so all of them are investing heavily in sort of hyperledger skills, etc. Your average hyperledger blockchain expert is probably one of the most expensive junior experts you could bring into your business if you wanted to contract them in, and that's because this is absolutely going to be how our infrastructure is governed. Blockchain will become the governing entity of our infrastructure in society. When you think about that, advertising 100% will be impacted, everything will be impacted, right? It is very conceivable that our children's children will not be exchanging physical cash. That is conceivable, right? So 1 to 2 generations. So therefore, all those businesses need to get into blockchain. Advertising will be one of the industries which will also, digital currency specifically could be playing a very significant role in the far future. But recording into ledgers, events, immutable records of transactions, right, will play a more nearer term role, right? And I think that will just be at the point when a globally scaled platform decides to do it. And the second they decide to do it, the rest will fall in tandem with that. And so they will all be moving their businesses around it. And the vernacular and lingo will change a bit as well of everybody that works in the industry, right? So it just will it will just be a cleaner environment for us, I think. And I think that's where I see that change happening. So yeah, definitely going to have repercussions on those businesses, the talent that they're going to invest in, the thinking that they're going to shape for the future. And you just can't avoid that. There are sides of the fence, and there's being on the fence. And I'm not on the fence. I'm on a specific side. And people will disagree with me, and I'm okay with that, right? But I think it's got massive implications for how we run our society, let alone just the advertising industry.
Amir, that's absolutely fascinating. And I'm so annoyed that we have run out of time, because I've got at least another 10 questions that I'd like to ask you.
Me too. I think there might be a part 2.
Yeah, that was what I was coming to. Do you think we can come back to you in a few weeks' time and have part 2 of this conversation? Yeah,
definitely. And the last point I'd leave you with, if we could leave a taster for that session, would be that advertising is increasingly being powered and fueled and productized around data, and the relationship between data and identity and blockchain is really fascinating. There is a massive convergence with the ad industry and customer data and data protection and data privacy. And that's where, the blockchain role gets super fascinating in terms of how it impacts just not advertising, our daily lives.
Advertising is being bought on totally corrupt data at the moment.
Well, there you go. And then also, how can the individual have a role to play in that as well? And I'm going to stop myself from going into those topics, but I mean, that to me is really more interesting.
All right, look, I really want to thank you both for a fascinating conversation this morning. To be continued in the near future. So thank you so much, Danny.
Thank you, Belinda.
Thank you so much, Amir.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Amir.
Can't wait to talk to you again soon.
Definitely. Been a real pleasure. Look forward to speaking to both of you again. Thanks, Danny. Thanks, Belinda.
Thanks, Amir.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.